I woke up to the sound of someone pounding on my fence like they owned the place. I pulled back the curtain, and there she was, Linda, the president of the Oakridge Heights Homeowners Association, megaphone in hand, barking orders at a crowd of nosy neighbors. Her face was so red it looked like she might explode, but what really caught my eye was the yellow tape she'd strung across my driveway, like it was a crime scene. "Property under observation," a sign read. Observation? For what? I hadn't even started my war yet, but right then, with Linda pointing at my house like I was some kind of outlaw, I knew this wasn't going to end well. 2 weeks earlier, I was just a guy trying to live quietly, with no clue that my backyard was about to become a legendary fortress. I lived in a modest house in Oakridge Heights, a neighborhood where everyone seemed to follow an invisible script of perfection, or at least tried to, under the hawk-like gaze of the HOA. The white picket fences gleamed as if hand-polished, the lawns looked like they'd been trimmed with a ruler, and even the birds seemed to know not to sing out of tune. At the center of this suburban theater reigned Linda. She wasn't just the HOA president, she was the head scriptwriter, director, and self-appointed five-star critic. With her Times New Roman size 12 emails, she ruled the neighborhood like an empress commanding an army of perfectly aligned mailboxes. Linda had an obsession with control that bordered on absurd. Once, I got an email from her at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, subject line, "Barbecue in public view." In 3 paragraphs, she explained that my barbecue, a brushed steel relic I used once a year to grill ribs, was too visible from the street and compromised the neighborhood's visual harmony. Her suggestion? Hide the offensive object behind a 1.8-meter fence, painted in a specific shade of beige she personally approved. I replied politely, promising to look into it, but really I just tossed the email into the virtual trash and moved on with my life. Big mistake. Linda wasn't the type to be ignored. I'd already collected other warnings from her. A $50 fine because my bike stayed on the porch an hour longer than allowed. Who times that? A notice because my trash can was 10 centimeters off the sidewalk. Line and even a formal letter suggesting I reconsider my living room curtains, which, according to her, didn't align with the neighborhood's neutral palette. I laughed, tucked the letters in a drawer and carried on. After all, it was just a neighborhood, not a dictatorship, right? Wrong. Everything changed on a dreary Monday when I found a cream-colored envelope with the HOA's golden seal stuffed in my mailbox. Inside was an official notice, written with the pomp of a royal decree. My driveway was out of alignment with the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony standards. Aesthetic harmony? My driveway was a slab of concrete so ordinary it could star in a commercial for monotony. The garage door, painted a generic gray, went up and down without complaint. No cracks, no graffiti, not even a spiderweb for personality. It was, in short, the most inoffensive driveway on the planet. But to Linda, it was a personal affront. I decided to face the beast. I rang the doorbell of her 2-story fortress, with windows so shiny they practically screamed, "I'm flawless." Linda opened the door with a smile that was half courtesy, half threat. Before I could explain that my driveway wasn't public enemy number 1, she crossed her arms and said, with the calm of someone who knows they hold the power, "The HOA decides what's best, Tom. You'll comply." I could have let it go like I always had. But something about that smile, or maybe the way she said my name like it was a final warning, lit a spark in me. I never thought orange traffic cones, the kind that screamed danger at any poorly planned construction site, would become my arch-enemies. But there they were, lined up like soldiers in front of my driveway, blocking my access as if I were an intruder in my own home. It was Tuesday morning. The sky was that gray that promises rain, and all I wanted was to grab my newspaper and read the world's bad headlines with a bad cup of coffee in hand. Instead, I was greeted by this ridiculous barricade. In the middle of the cones, taped with the precision of a surgeon, was a note on HOA letterhead. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Access restricted pending HOA review. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Thompson." Mr. Thompson? Linda had known my name since I moved to Oakridge Heights, but now I was just a number on her list of offenders. I stood there, newspaper forgotten on the grass, feeling my blood boil. Blocking my driveway? This wasn't just a fine or a passive-aggressive email about curtains. It was a declaration of war, with Linda wielding her ballpoint pen like a sword. I tried to take a deep breath, count to 10, remind myself that picking a fight with the HOA president wasn't exactly the wisest way to start the day. But outrage won. I slipped on my sneakers, crossed the street with steps that probably woke the squirrels, and knocked on Linda's fortress door. She took her time answering, of course. When the door finally creaked open, there she was. Blonde hair pulled into a bun so perfect it seemed to defy gravity, gold-rimmed glasses perched on the tip of her nose, and that smile, that cold, rehearsed smile that said, "You've already lost before you started." Before I could speak, she raised an eyebrow as if my presence were an inconvenience. "Yes, Tom?" "Linda, this is ridiculous," I began, pointing toward my house as if the cones were visible from there. "You can't just block my driveway like that. It's my garage, my property." I tried to keep my voice steady, but frustration seeped through the edges. She peered at me over her glasses, her smile curling up on one side as if I'd said something adorably naive. "We've had complaints, Tom. Your driveway is causing visual discomfort. Until the HOA reviews the matter, the cones stay. It's for the good of the community." "Complaints? From who?" I asked, already knowing it was a pointless question. Linda had a knack for turning gossip into official facts. "What visual discomfort? It's a driveway, Linda, not a neon billboard." She crossed her arms, the kind of gesture that ended discussions before they even began. "The HOA doesn't disclose sources, Tom. You know how the rules work." And then, with the grace of someone dismissing a door-to-door salesman, she closed the door. Not with force, not with drama, just the soft click of someone who knows they're in control. I stood there on her welcome mat, which, by the way, had "Home is where the heart is" in perfect cursive, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. Anonymous complaints, visual discomfort. It was so absurd it almost made me laugh, almost. Because deep down I knew Linda wouldn't stop. She was like a shark smelling blood. Now that she'd marked me as a target, the cones were just the beginning. I could bet that by next week she'd demand I paint my house beige because grey attracts negative energy, or some nonsense like that. As I walked back home, kicking a pebble that dared cross my path, one thing became clear: swallowing. This wasn't an option anymore. I could have ignored the fines, laughed at the letters, filed the emails in a folder called Neighborhood Nonsense. But blocking my driveway, that was personal. Linda wanted war, and I wasn't going to settle for sending a polite email. To the HOA. No, I was going to give her an epic battle, one that Oakridge Heights wouldn't forget any time soon. If I thought the orange cones were the peak of Linda's audacity, I underestimated her. In the days that followed, she turned my life into a dystopian reality show called The Siege of Oakridge Heights. Beyond the cones, which stood firm like monuments to bureaucracy, Linda upped the ante. HOA inspectors, a group of middle-aged neighbors with clipboards and expressions that screamed they'd rather be anywhere else, started circling my property like vultures. They showed up unannounced, always at the worst possible moment, when I was trying to balance a coffee mug and a work call, or when I was rushing out to grab a delivery before the driver gave up. There they were, snapping photos of my driveway with phones that looked straight out of 2005, scribbling notes in little pads like they were detectives on a heinous crime case. Once I caught one of them measuring the width of my driveway with a tape measure, muttering something about structural deviations. Structural deviations? It was concrete, not the Taj Mahal. Then came the fines, dropping into my mailbox like confetti at a party I wasn't invited to. The first, for improper driveway maintenance, claimed there was a tiny oil stain, probably from my sister's car, which had been there weeks earlier. The second, for visual obstruction, was so absurd I almost framed it. Apparently, her cones were blocking the neighborhood's aesthetic flow, but somehow I was to blame. Each fine came with a polite note, signed in Linda's impeccable handwriting. "Thank you for your cooperation in keeping Oakridge Heights pristine." Cooperation? I was one step away from feeding those letters to a shredder. I tried to appeal. I wrote an email to the HOA, keeping it professional, explaining that my driveway was functional, the fines were unfair, and the cones were an invasion of my property. The response, a generic paragraph saying my request would be reviewed at the next quarterly meeting, 2 months away. I tried talking to other HOA members, but it was like trying to convince a flock of sheep to face a wolf. Mr. Jenkins, who handled the HOA's finances, stammered something about procedures and hung up. Mrs. Patel, who seemed to be the only one with a shred of common sense, sighed and said, "Tom, you know how Linda is, better not mess with her." Linda had this gift, or curse, for turning any argument into a veiled threat, as if crossing her meant signing up for social exile. But I'm not one to give up. If Linda thought she'd break me with fines and inspectors, she didn't know me. I spent nights awake, my laptop glowing in the dark living room, browsing zoning law websites so poorly designed they seemed built to cause headaches. I researched zoning codes, HOA regulations, property statutes, anything that could give me an edge. I drank so much coffee my machine started giving me judgmental looks. It was during one of those late nights when my eyes were burning and the cursor blinked like a challenge that I found my secret weapon, an obscure municipal law buried in a 300-page PDF that allowed temporary safety modifications to private property, as long as they weren't permanent and didn't alter the main structure. The law was vague enough to be useful but specific enough to be legit. It was like finding a loophole in a contract signed by the devil. As I read and reread the paragraph, a crazy idea started forming in my head, like one of those light bulbs that pop up in cartoons. It wasn't just an idea. It was a statement, a masterpiece of rebellion. I could dig a moat around my driveway, nothing deep, just enough to make the cones irrelevant and keep the inspectors at bay. And to top it off, why not a drawbridge? Something simple, wooden, that I could raise and lower with a rope like a medieval castle in the middle of suburbia. Was it ridiculous? Sure. Was it genius? Absolutely. The law said temporary and safety, and I could argue the moat protected my property from HOA intrusions, while the drawbridge ensured my access. Linda wanted aesthetic harmony? I was going to give her a spectacle. I knew digging a moat around my driveway was the kind of idea that could land me at the top of Oakridge Heights' crazy neighbor list, or maybe in a newspaper article. Headlined, "Man Declares War on HOA with Excavator," but it was exactly what I needed. It wasn't just about protecting my driveway. It was about sending a message as big as the tires on the machine I was about to rent. Linda wanted to play dictator. I'd meet her on her level, but with more style and a touch of medieval flair. I called Nate, my friend who worked in construction, and had a sense of humor as sharp as his saws. "Nate, I need to dig a moat around my driveway, like a castle moat, and maybe a drawbridge." On the other end of the line, silence. Then, a laugh so loud I pictured him wiping away tears. "Tom, you're kidding, right?" When I explained I was serious and showed him the municipal law that backed me up, he changed his tune. "Dude, that's insane. I'm in. When do we start?" Nate wasn't just a skilled carpenter. He had that energy of someone who'd jump into any project if it promised a good story, and I knew this story was going to be epic. That same afternoon, I went to the equipment rental shop, where a guy named Reggie, with a beard that seemed to hold ancient secrets, handed me the keys to a compact excavator. "What do you need this for, buddy?" he asked as I signed the contract. "Home security," I replied, with the most serious face I could muster. He raised an eyebrow but didn't press. I also hired a small crew Nate recommended, 2 guys named Diego and Carl, who seemed more excited about the idea than I'd expected. "Castle Moat? Man, that's legendary," Diego said, while Carl was already doing mental math on the ideal depth. The plan was simple but ambitious. The moat wouldn't be some half-baked ditch. It would be a work worthy of a castle, 2 meters wide and 1 meter deep, encircling the driveway like a territorial embrace. Nothing permanent. The law required it to be temporary, so I could fill it back in later without breaking any rules. The drawbridge, courtesy of Nate's genius, would be made of reinforced wood, with ropes and pulleys to raise and lower it. It didn't need to be fancy. just functional enough to let me come and go, and dramatic enough to make Linda rethink her life choices. As we sketched the project on a torn piece of paper with cold coffee on my kitchen table, I felt a surge of excitement. It was like planning a master heist in a robbery movie, except instead of a bank, my target was Linda's ego. The big day arrived on a scorching Thursday, the kind of morning that made Oakridge Heights lawns gleam like a real estate ad. 7 sharp, the excavator roared to life in my driveway, followed by Nate's pickup with Diego and Carl hopping out like stars of an extreme renovation show. The neighbors started to peek. Curtains twitched, heads popped out on porches. Mrs. Delaney, my 80-year-old neighbor, who seemed to know everything before anyone else, waved from her window with a grin that said, "Go for it, kid." We started. Digging and the sound of earth being torn apart was like a symphony of rebellion. Linda's cones, those symbols of her reign, were swallowed by the moat, tumbling like defeated soldiers into a trench. I knew Linda wouldn't take long to show up, and sure enough, she didn't disappoint. At 9:15, there she came, marching down the sidewalk with her inspectors in tow, a clumsy trio that looked more embarrassed than threatening. She wore a navy blazer that screamed authority and sunglasses that probably cost more than my TV. When she got close enough to see the moat, now a glorious scar around my driveway, with piles of dirt stacked like trophies, her jaw dropped, literally. For a second, Linda, the queen of composure, looked like a statue someone forgot to finish. "What is this, Tom?" she shrieked, her voice trembling with rage and disbelief. She was so close to the edge, I almost expected her to trip and become part of the scenery. The inspectors stopped behind her, exchanging glances like they wished they were in any other neighborhood. I looked up, wiping sweat from my forehead with my sleeve, and answered with the calm of someone who'd won the first round. "Security, Linda. Temporary measure, all within the law. My property, my rules." I held back a smile, but inside, I was dancing. Linda went livid, her face a shade of red that seemed to defy the HOA's approved color palette. "You can't dig a hole in the middle of the neighborhood," she yelled, pointing at the moat like I'd opened a portal to another dimension. "This is against the rules. It's an abomination." Her voice shook, and for the first time since this war began, I saw a strand of hair escape her perfect bun. It was a tiny sign of chaos, and I loved every second of it. Calmly, I pulled a document from my jacket pocket, a carefully folded copy of the municipal zoning law, with the relevant section highlighted in fluorescent yellow. I'd spent hours at City Hall the previous week, confirming every comma with a board clerk who seemed shocked anyone actually read those files. "Actually, Linda, it's completely legal," I said, handing her the paper with the ease of someone holding both the knife and the cheese. "I checked with City Hall. I even have a permit for temporary security modifications. Want me to show you?" She snatched the document from my hand, her eyes narrowing as she read, as if she could burn the paper with sheer willpower. The moat, still fresh with piled dirt around it, mocked her in silence. The inspectors behind her, the same awkward trio as always, exchanged nervous glances, clearly unprepared for this level of resistance. Linda ran her finger over the highlighted paragraph, muttering something about misinterpretations. But I knew she was cornered. The document was bureaucrat-proof, and I had extra copies at home just in case. "This isn't over, Tom," she hissed, shoving the paper back with enough force to nearly tear it. Her heels dug into the grass as she spun and stormed off, the inspectors scurrying after her like loyal but slightly lost minions. As the dust of her defeat settled, Nate, who'd been watching it all with his arms crossed next to the half-built drawbridge, let out a low whistle. "Dude, you just checkmated the neighborhood queen, but she's going to come back with a tank. You know that, right?" I knew. Linda wasn't the type to accept defeat, especially not in front of half of Oakridge Heights, who were now peeking from windows or pretending to water their gardens just to catch the drama. But I wasn't done, far from it. The moat was just the opening act, the appetizer of a rebellion that was only starting to take shape. As the neighbors whispered and phones recorded on the sly, my mind was already on the cherry on top, a drawbridge that wasn't just functional, but a slap in the face of Linda's obsession with aesthetic harmony. I wanted something that would make the whole neighborhood stop, stare, and maybe even laugh. That same afternoon, I called a local engineer named Marcus, a guy I'd met at a barbecue months earlier. He had a reputation for turning crazy ideas into reality, like the guy who built a zip line in his backyard for his 10-year-old daughter. When I explained the Drawbridge plan, he went quiet for about 5 seconds, and I thought he was going to call me nuts. But then he laughed, a deep, excited laugh. "Tom, that's brilliant. It's like Game of Thrones meets suburbia. Give me a week and we'll make this Drawbridge legendary." Marcus showed up the next morning with a notebook full of sketches and an energy that seemed fueled by coffee and pure adrenaline. We sat on my porch with the moat in the background like a trophy and planned the masterpiece. No ordinary drawbridge, like those thrown together for backyard medieval fairs. This would be high-tech, a blend of reinforced wood with an electric motor system controlled by an app. I could raise and lower the bridge with a tap on my phone, maybe even with a trumpet. Sound effect that Marcus swore he could program. The structure would be sturdy enough to support my car, but light enough to not violate the temporary modification clause. And of course it would have style, maybe a metallic grey paint job, just to poke at Linda with a colour she'd never approve. While Marcus took measurements and Nate oversaw the delivery of materials, oak planks, steel cables, a motor that looked like it came straight out of a sci-fi movie, I could feel the neighbourhood changing around me. Mrs. Delaney, my octogenarian neighbour who seemed to know everyone's secrets, shuffled by with her walker and winked at me. "Linda's never seen anyone stand up to her like this, Tom. Keep going." Even the kid on the bike, now doing tricks on the street just to watch the construction, shouted, "It's looking awesome, dude." Oakridge Heights, with its white picket fences and perfect lawns, was starting to crack, and I was the sledgehammer. As the ditch held Linda's cones like prisoners of war, I dove headfirst into building the drawbridge. It wasn't just about functionality. It was my chance to turn the most hated garage in Oakridge Heights into a monument of defiance. With Evie, Marcus, the engineer who treated the project like his masterpiece, we chose solid oak planks, polished until they gleamed like they'd come from an enchanted forest. The hinges were industrial steel, the kind that could survive an apocalypse, and the electric motor, a silent marvel, raised and lowered the bridge with the smoothness of a theatre curtain, all controlled by an app Marcus programmed with near-paternal pride. But I wanted more. To give it that extra touch that would make Linda grind her teeth, we embedded LED lights in the structure, programmed to flash blue and red at night, as if my garage were the stage for a rock concert. When we turned it on for the first time, the glow reflected off the ditch and turned my yard into a spectacle. Even Spielberg couldn't have directed better. The whole neighborhood became an audience. Kids stopped their bikes, pointing and yelling, "It's like a castle," while parents pretended to water their gardens just to sneak a peek. The mailman, a guy named Dave who usually only talked about the weather, slowed his van and snapped photos with his phone, muttering something about never seeing anything like this in 20 years of deliveries. Even Mrs. Delaney, my neighbour, with a radar for trouble, showed up on her porch with a glass of lemonade, waving like I was a general returning from battle. Oakridge Heights, with its white fences and awkward silences, was coming to life, and I was the conductor of this little revolution. Linda, of course, wasn't going to let it slide as just a neighbourly quirk. She came back with a vengeance, trying to convince the council to fine me for unauthorised structural alteration and disruption of visual order. But I was already 2 steps ahead. Before she could send out her Times New Roman emails, I mailed a packet of documents to every council member, copies of municipal law, the city permit, even a legal opinion from a lawyer friend I'd confirmed, via email. Each page was armor, and I knew Linda couldn't pierce it. Still, she pressed on, calling an emergency council meeting, probably hoping to crush me with her neighborhood queen rhetoric. The meeting was on a Thursday night in the community hall that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. I arrived prepared with my laptop, a folder of documents, and a smile that said, "Try to take me down." Linda took the podium like she was leading a crusade, her navy blazer so crisp it seemed to defy physics. She pointed at me, her voice dripping with rehearsed outrage. "What Mr. Thompson has done is an atrocity. A ditch in the middle of the neighborhood, a lit-up bridge that looks like a circus. This destroys the harmony we've all worked so hard to maintain. She looked around expecting automatic applause, but the silence that followed was so heavy you could hear the hum of the air conditioner. That's when Emma, a neighbor I barely knew, a single mum who lived 3 houses down and always seemed too busy for meetings like this, stood up. She crossed her arms, her hair in a messy ponytail, and stared Linda down with a courage that made the room hold its breath. If Tom wants to protect his house, what's the problem? He's within the law, unlike certain fines someone loves to invent. She paused, locking eyes with Linda. Don't you ever get tired of controlling everyone's lives, Linda? Let the guy live. The silence erupted into applause. It wasn't unanimous. Some neighbors still seemed scared to betray the Queen, but it was loud enough to make Linda freeze. For the first time, I saw her face lose its composure, her mouth slightly agape as if someone had unplugged her software. The Drawbridge was finished on a Friday night, and I knew the debut had to be memorable, something Oakridge Heights wouldn't. Forget any time soon. It wasn't just about raising and lowering a bridge. It was about staking my claim, showing I wouldn't bend the knee to Linda and her reign of absurd rules. So, I turned the moment into an event. I invited a few neighbors, Emma, Mrs. Delaney, Nate, and even Dave the mailman, who seemed more curious than ever. As the sun set, painting the sky that orange hue that made the neighborhood feel less oppressive, I gathered everyone on the sidewalk with glasses of lemonade Mrs. Delaney insisted on bringing. "It'll be like the 4th of July, Tom," she said with a mischievous glint in her eyes. With a tap on my phone, I activated the bridge app. The motor hummed softly, and the oak structure rose with a grace that even Marcus, the engineer, applauded. The embedded LED lights came on, pulsing blue and red, turning the ditch into an illuminated moat straight out of a sci-fi movie. The neighborhood kids, who already treated the project like a tourist attraction, screamed with excitement, while the adults whispered, some laughing, others shaking their heads in a mix of awe and envy. I raised the bridge to its peak, paused for dramatic effect, then lowered it slowly, the lights flashing in sync. When it hit the ground with a satisfying thud, Emma let out an, "That's epic, Tom," and even Mr. Jenkins, who usually only talked about budgets at council meetings, cracked a shy smile. The ditch, now an impenetrable 2-meter barrier, surrounded the garage like a castle moat, and the bridge was my triumphant gateway, a masterpiece that said, "Try to stop me now." But of course, Linda wasn't going to let the party go unanswered. On Saturday morning, as I sipped coffee and admired my creation through the window, she stormed in like a walking hurricane. This time, she brought a brand new megaphone, the kind that seemed designed for barking orders in an apocalypse. Standing on the other side of the ditch, her navy blazer pristine despite the heat, she switched it on and let it echo. "Tom Thompson, you are disrespecting the community with this abomination. This is an affront to the values of Oakridge Heights." I stepped calmly onto the porch, phone in hand, and stood at the edge of the ditch, looking at her with the ease of someone who knows they've won the round. "Disrespect, Linda. You blocked my garage with cones. I just did what I had to do to protect my property." I raised my phone, pretending to check the bridge app just to poke at her. "Want me to open it so you can try finding my lawn now?" The neighbors who'd gathered, because by now my house was practically a circus, started laughing. Emma let out a loud cackle, and even Mrs. Delaney, watching from her porch with binoculars, because of course she had binoculars, called out, "That's it, Tom, send her home." Linda tried to keep going, shouting something about community, standards and civic responsibility, but the megaphone couldn't compete with the laughter. For the first time, I saw her face turn genuinely red, not from anger but from humiliation. Out of arguments, she spun on her heels and marched off, the megaphone swinging like a defeated weapon. I decided it was time to turn the tables for good. For weeks, I watched Linda desperately try to salvage her reputation, fake smiles in the hallways, impromptu meetings to show she was still in charge, convincing residents it was all just gossip. But behind her theatrics, I was working. Quietly, digging deeper than she could ever imagine. I started digging into the Homeowners Association. I combed through old documents, requested copies of meeting minutes, and scrutinized receipts with a clinical eye. That's when the pieces began to fall into place. Linda was treating Oakridge Heights' budget like her personal piggy bank. Payments for renovations to her house, exorbitant purchases disguised as administrative expenses, council events that never happened, no photos, no invitations. There was even a monthly subscription to a luxury spa listed in the spreadsheet, justified as an investment in community well-being. The audacity was staggering. I gathered every piece of evidence with the care of someone assembling a dangerous puzzle. Receipts, hastily exchanged emails, bank statements. I made copies, organized them into folders, and prepared a bulletproof dossier. Deep down, I knew the moment of truth was coming. At the next council meeting, I asked to speak. Linda, sensing something was up, tried to shut me down with her usual control tactics. "This isn't on the agenda," she said with that forced smile. But this time the residents weren't on her side. "Let him talk," someone shouted from the back. Others chimed in. The pressure was too strong for her to contain. I stood up with the dossier in hand and began laying it all out, page by page, number by number. I stayed calm. There was no need to shout, the evidence spoke for itself. As I presented the documents, Linda's face drained of color. When I mentioned the spa subscription, she jumped up, flustered, and yelled, "That's a lie." But all it took was me holding up the bank statement with her name highlighted to silence the room. No one said a word. The weight of the truth was palpable. That same night, a vote was held. It was unanimous. Linda was officially removed as council president. But her downfall didn't stop there. The evidence I'd compiled was so damning that it caught the attention of a lawyer in town who occasionally visited his parents in the neighborhood. He reviewed the documents and got straight to the point. Linda could face legal action for embezzlement. As the official investigation gained traction, Linda started fading from the scene. The once flamboyant woman who loved dominating every meeting and parading around the neighborhood like a queen now hid inside her house. Her curtains stayed drawn, her garden grew neglected, and her porch, once adorned with expensive flowers, looked like a scene of abandonment. Meanwhile, my yard became the neighborhood's true tourist attraction. The infamous ditch and drawbridge, the same ones that nearly sparked a war, were now a source of fascination. At night, the LED lights created a subtle but mesmerizing spectacle, and residents started strolling by just to see it. Kids begged to watch the bridge go up, and I let them, sometimes even letting them press the button on my phone, which became the highlight of their visit. Adults came too, curious, snapping photos, praising the makeshift engineering. Soon they gave me a nickname, the Bridge Guy. And you know what? I loved it. What started as a simple garage dispute had, without meaning to, become a symbol of resistance against unfair rules and corrupt leadership. Every click of the bridge was a small victory. Every laugh from the kids, a reminder that it was worth it. A few weeks after Linda's fall, as the neighborhood finally started to feel peaceful again, I got an unexpected visitor. It was a city inspector, wrinkled dress shirt, clipboard in hand, and the look of someone who'd seen it all. The moment he introduced himself, I knew. This was Linda's doing, a final shot, probably sent from whatever hole she was hiding, in hoping to take me down legally. But she'd forgotten one detail. I was prepared. Inviting the inspector inside, I got straight to the point. I pulled a folder from the drawer with all the necessary permits, emails exchanged with the city, and records of every construction phase, all properly filed. I also handed over a technical report from a civil engineer describing the bridge's structure with the professionalism of a public works project. The inspector read through it, checked everything, looked up and smiled. "Look, I've seen a waterless pool registered as an ornamental lake, but this is next level." He walked around the ditch, stepped onto the bridge, tested the mechanisms, and when the bridge rose smoothly, he let out a genuine laugh. "Never seen anything like this, but it's all up to code." Then, like a curious tourist, he asked, "Can I take a picture?" "Be my guest," I replied with a touch of pride. That night, I knew I deserved to celebrate. I threw a party in the yard with the raised bridge. As the backdrop, lit up by the LED lights dancing in shades of blue, I invited the whole neighborhood, everyone except Linda, of course. Her absence was noticed only by the relief in the air. Emma, my favorite neighbor and ally from the start, showed up with a massive cake, written in blue icing, "Way to go, Tom." The kids ran across the lawn, laughing and dancing, mesmerized by the light show and, of course, the moment I let each one press the bridge button. The structure moved like magic, earning applause every time it went up and down. That was the night I realized I hadn't just won a fight. I'd earned the respect and the heart of the neighborhood. But the real final blow came on a sunny Saturday morning. I was watering the plants when I heard the unmistakable rumble of a heavy engine. I looked down the street and saw a moving truck parked in front of Linda's house. There she was, dressed in plain clothes, her face hidden under a cap and sunglasses. She avoided eye contact with anyone, keeping her head down every time a neighbor passed by. She loaded boxes in a hurry, like someone desperate to vanish without a trace. No one approached her. No one offered to help. The woman who once ruled as the absolute president of the Homeowners Association left in silence, accompanied only by the sound of her own footsteps and her shame. I don't know if it was the investigation, the scandal, or simply the humiliation of losing control. But Oakridge Heights was definitely no longer her kingdom. When the moving truck pulled away and turned the corner, I felt the entire neighborhood breathe, as if an invisible weight had finally been lifted. It was the start of a new era. The council was restructured, now made up of residents genuinely invested in the collective good. The rules became clearer, more humane. Meetings returned to being about real improvements, not ego battles. And my famous ditch with the drawbridge, oh, it stayed put, strong and steady like a symbol, a reminder that even the strictest rules can be bent with creativity, courage, and a good remote control button. I posted a video of the bridge in action on social media just for fun. Within days, it blew up. Thousands of likes, comments from people all over the world. Folks wrote saying they too had a Linda in their lives, and my video inspired them to push back. My house became almost a local tourist attraction, and my nickname stuck for good. Tom, the bridge guy. And you know what? I couldn't be happier. Today, my garage is much more than a slab of concrete. It's practically a monument, a living reminder that sometimes the best way to win is not to back down, but to reinvent. It's proof that you can stand up to those who try to control you, and come out on top with a bit of creativity, stubbornness, and why not a sense of humor. The ditch stands firm, like a scar that became a trademark. The drawbridge rises and falls with a single tap on my phone, like magic. And the LED lights, oh, they shine every night, painting the darkness with soft hues that make the whole neighborhood look better. Oakridge Heights has never been so united. Neighbors talk more. Council meetings are now filled with laughter instead of tension. Even the playground got a makeover, thanks to a suggestion from the new president, who, by the way, brought coffee and cake to the last meeting. Sometimes, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea in my hands, staring at my glowing bridge, and I catch myself smiling, remembering that it all started with some stupid cones. It's funny how life's small battles can turn into big revolutions. The garage, the ditch, the bridge, they've all become symbols of something bigger. The right to say no when someone tries to push you into a corner. Today I finally feel at home, and for the first time in a long while, I feel like the neighborhood does too.